This is about the Industrial Revolution, but it's also about the beginning of modern America. The two are very closely related. Now, let's first look at what makes modern America modern. Well, one thing is a result of the Civil War that we tend to think of ourselves as a nation rather than as a union of separate independent states. And the federal government is much stronger as a result of the Civil War and Reconstruction. Uh, Before the Civil War, the South really had more power over politics than the North did. Most presidents before the Civil War were Southerners. Most were slaveholders. That changes. There's a long period after the Civil War when the South simply doesn't have any presidents. Um, there is also a tremendously important movement toward the West, which we've already studied. And eventually, the frontier comes to an end. And that changes the nature of the country. There was a theory based on that called the frontier thesis of Frederick Jackson Turner that we'll study in a separate presentation. Um, the population is much larger and much more diverse, ethnically diverse, for example, various nationalities coming together, and with vastly different roles also for African Americans in the population. And certainly women are demanding more and more that they be included in the opportunities offered to Americans. That would be a tough fight, but it's a fight that is going on in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Um, Urbanization makes America more modern. In other words, uh, living in cities. Urban means related to cities, and the cities are getting much, much larger. Uh, Industrialization is extremely important, and that's mainly what we're going to talk about here. We're not talking about the market revolution of the pre-Civil War period, where um, there were businesses that began to produce things for a larger market, but they weren't huge businesses. They weren't national corporations. They didn't produce, for the most part, for buyers all over the country. But after the Civil War, that process begins. Now, let's focus especially on the Industrial Revolution. It included mass production, producing huge numbers of the same items so that they could be produced cheaply and sold to wide areas. And along with mass production, you have to have mass distribution. You have to be able to sell the product to very large areas, what we'll call a national market. Uh, if you can't do that, then there's no point in producing large numbers. Um, it and when you produced a lot, that resulted in what is called economies of scale. Economies is just a word for saving money, and scale is a word for size. So you save money if you uh, have a huge business, if you build or manufacture enormous numbers of the same product, then each individual product gets cheaper. It would be incredibly expensive to produce just one sewing machine, for example, but you could make it much cheaper if you produced a million of them. Each one uh, would cost far less than the one sewing machine cost. Uh, there was growing productivity. Now, that's an important term that economists use. What that means is the ratio of output to hours worked. So, for example, one worker working a 10-hour day could produce a certain number of goods, could accomplish a certain amount of work. Now, if machines come along, technology of some kind, better ways of organizing the workforce, etc. And that one worker working for 10 hours can produce more things than he could before, then economists would say that his productivity has gone up. In other words, how productive he is, how much he can produce in a certain amount of time. Now, prices tended to go down during the Industrial Revolution, but these large corporations sold so many things that they made more money. Um, Henry Ford figured out how to sell cars, for example, for as low as $260 a piece for a brand new Model T at one point. Other automakers earlier wanted to make $1,000 profit on each car. Well, Henry Ford couldn't possibly do that. The whole car only cost $260. So he made a few dollars profit on each car. But the difference is he sold millions of them. And guess who was more successful? It was Henry Ford with this approach. Um, Large national corporations start to emerge during the Gilded Age and in the early 20th century. This starts to make the country look more like what it looks like today. Now, for this to happen, you needed a number of different conditions, and the United States had them all. We were the China of the 19th century. We were the up-and-coming industrial powerhouse. You need an agricultural surplus produced by fewer farmers. If all of your population, or most of it, is devoted to producing food, then they're not free to do other things. If you can feed your population with a smaller number of farmers, then those farmers can support the work of other workers producing manufactured goods, producing sewing machines, producing furniture, later producing cars, and so on. You need natural resources or raw materials, certainly coal, iron ore, oil, timber, water, and the United States had all of those in great abundance. You needed a big enough workforce, and immigration, in many cases, provided that. You need workers, mostly in these corporations of the 19th century. They didn't have to be extremely well educated. They just had to work extremely hard. And immigrants formed an enormous pool of labor from which these companies could draw. Now, along with this, you need what's called an elastic workforce, a workforce that can expand when it needs to and shrink or contract when it needs to do that. Immigration provided this. For example, some immigration was circular migration. So the workers would come when the economy was good, and then when there were layoffs, they would turn around and go back to the old country. Well, when they went back, that meant that the U.S. did not have to spend money on dealing with their needs or dealing with the problems that they raised. The workforce could expand and contract, and that was a great luxury that many economies do not have. You needed a stable government with policies that would support the growth of business. The United States certainly had that, sometimes too much. The government supported businesses sometimes at the expense of their workers. You absolutely needed a good transportation system, especially in a country as vast as the United States. The railroads allowed raw materials to get to factories. They allowed finished products to get to markets. And in the process, they boosted the economy in many ways. You need markets. From a rapidly growing population, you could get them. A market is simply a term that economists use for a group of buyers who want a product. So if you say there's a market for Model Ts, that means there are a lot of people out there who want to buy them. And because the population was growing so fast, markets were expanding also. It doesn't do you any good to produce a lot of things unless you can sell them, unless there are people who want them. Uh, Education is extremely important. Not as important as it is today, but there are certain basic kinds of education that mattered a great deal for those who were higher up in industrial society. Technology mattered a great deal. They tended not to use that word then, but it was technology. Machines, for example, that could produce goods more efficiently. The railroads were an amazingly important technology. And finally, you need capital. Capital is money that can be used for investment. The money that you spend on lunch is not capital. That's consumption, and that's fine. We need to have lunch. But if there's other money that can be devoted to investing in businesses, that is called capital. And the United States was a wealthy enough country that there was capital.